This isn't about getting better. It's just about trying to become more towards a whole as a self. So again, we're going to jump in with the myth of linearity. Growth often feels like regression. You aren't back at square one. You're visiting square one with a new level of awareness. If you had to lose everything you currently use to define your success, what would be left of you that is actually true? If you had to lose everything you currently use to define your success, what would be left of you that is actually true?
I like spreading positivity. Spreading positivity, I think, is my fundamental baseline. And there's a through line with that, with everything that I do. So if everything else was to be taken away, I would still fundamentally be somebody that loves to spread like positivity and try and help people out if they're not feeling their best. I think that's the main underlying one. Maybe other ones are... It all comes back to just helping people out. Like, when somebody's not feeling their best, when they're like financially struggling, being able to support them, all of those sort of things. Just, I think fundamentally I'm a person of service that often gets clouded actually by all the things I have going on in my life.
So you find that sometimes the outside noise or what you choose to keep busy pulls you away from maybe your core values?
Yeah, although there is a through line, as I say, but I feel like it's diluted through the medium of which I am participating in.
Yeah, so I suppose this question that we've got here that I chose to jump onto you with, what would be left of you that's actually true, is going to be your character and your core values initially. That's where people's minds are going to go. So it's your integrity, your kindness, your empathy, your honesty, and what you fundamentally believe is right. So it's going to remain your compass of how you choose to navigate. What values do you think people align themselves most with? So if you strip away external validation, what do you think people define as right or wrong when it comes to values?
But before we get into that, I want to tell you about Huel. Down in the description there is money off if you use our link on your first Huel order. My favourite drink is the berry one. I also quite like the salted caramel. Your favourite is...
chocolate or cookies and cream black edition?
Now, I'm not a fan of the chocolate. But anyway, down on that link, I've also linked like bundles and whatever that sort of are recommendations. So go and check them out. Let us know which one's your favourite. And yeah, then you won't have to eat meals, which is the biggest pro probably. I hate eating. So it saves me having to do that and prepare meals. Back to the episode. I think fundamentally it's not causing harm to others. If it's not causing physical or psychological harm to others, then you're probably in the clear, so far as most people's values are concerned. It's funny, if you do strip people back down to their fundamental values, I feel like the world would actually fundamentally be a better place.
Why do you think that?
I think the stresses and the noise of our day-to-day activities that are in life, so work, like family life, like you feel like you're being ridden all the time. Like you just want to, or you feel like you're under a lot of pressure and therefore you're not able to be your best self. Whereas if you just only had to focus on your values, you would, just be able to live to those values more easily because you're not going to be overtired because you didn't have to get up and go and do something for a boss that you don't like because you have requirements. So it's almost like what happens if we remove all the man-made structures that are in the way of us living truly authentically. And I think, to be honest, down the line, AI will probably help with that. And UBI will help with helping people live fundamentally to their values.
I think it's interesting, like you say, if we're removing external validation, people are then going to navigate life more through their internal identity, which is their core values and beliefs. And likely, for the vast majority of people, it's then going to allow them to focus more on relationships. Rather than how can I externally gain validation, it's going to be how can I positively benefit this person I'm interacting with? Can I be of service of them?
Yeah.
If the external validation of, pursuing a career and climbing the corporate ladder is removed, or that success is removed, think of all the relationships you've maybe had to put to the side to gain that sort of success. They likely become more important again. So it allows people to really make a deep connection with people, really connect with people exactly where they're at. I also think it's probably going to build resiliency, because you are not going to have anything external to validate with. You are going to have to turn into your internal validation and metrics. So I'd like to think it would instill a growth mindset in people with an ability to learn from their setbacks, adapt to different environments, and keep growing as a person. That's what I'd like to think. So when it comes to, growth, we said we're going to jump into the myth of linearity, which is often how people perceive growth to be, which is a clear line from point A to point B, A to Z, 1 to 10, whatever it might be. Linear progress is a comforting idea when it comes to growth, but human growth is spiral shaped, it's emotionally uneven. What feels like regression is often integration, and the nervous system revisiting old materials with new capacity. So we often visualize growth as like a ladder almost, but it's actually a spiral. If you feel like you failed because an old trigger came back, the person's likely missing the point. You aren't back at the start, you're seeing it from a higher vantage point. So when you're in this journey of self-development and you're reminded of an old, I use the word that people throw around, trigger, or an old circumstance that caused you some grief, people often think they're regressing and going backwards. But in reality, you have the ability in this growth process to employ those new skills you've learned and look back with kinder eyes employ these new skills, as I said, to become more adept at handling this issue. Why do we think people view it as regression, though?
It could almost be a link to when you first start doing something, you have blissful ignorance as to how little you do know and how much you don't know. Once you know a little bit and you've made some progress, you see the road in front of you and how long it is and how twisty and turny it is, and the roadblocks that are potentially in the way, which instantly makes you feel a lot smaller in the grand scheme of the whole road. Whereas when you first start to make progress, you obviously aren't aware necessarily about, the rest of the road might be around a corner. You can't see it. It could be a tie to that.
Are you suggesting what people have said in the past, which is life has to be lived forwards but only makes sense in the reverse? So although you've got your lights on, you've probably got your lights on backwards. You can't quite see what's coming forward. You might be able to see a step or two or three in front of you, and sometimes you can see 5, sometimes you can't see the next one. But you can always look back in hindsight. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And then what you don't know is maybe that road comes in a little bit of a circle, comes back to point number 1 that you've been struggling with, but you haven't seen that growth that you've done to get back there. I think people get absorbed by the crushing feeling that is, I should be over this by now. I think the regression itself comes from the expectation of where one thinks they should be. They put too much pressure on this development journey. They put too much pressure on themselves that growth should happen in a time frame. People do it all the time after a breakup. They go, why can't I just feel normal? Now, how long is this going to be? How long am I going to feel like this? And then they start comparing to other people. Well, my ex is fine now, or my friend took 2 months. Why is this taking me a year? It's because we like to put meaning on things. We like to find reasons why. We like to have a clear point A and point B. But in reality, growth is not linear. It's a myth when it comes to that.
Yeah. I think it's actually it can be helpful so long as you hit your targets, thinking of growth in a linear way. Especially with personal development, so not that there's particularly clear ways of tracking it. One of the ways that when I was going through my last breakup, I helped track it was, can I go 5 minutes by distracting myself or doing whatever, not thinking about my ex? And then a month later, can I go maybe 2-3 hours without by distracting myself? Because it would just, no matter what I was doing, even if I was trying to distract myself, thoughts would still come in, memories would happen, or I'd think, oh, I've just been invited out to go for a coffee. Oh, I used to go out for coffee. I've just thought that resets that. So maybe you can track progress like that. And so long as you hit your target, so like 5 minutes in week 1, and then an hour or 2 or 3 by month 1, by month 2, maybe you'll be able to do a whole day.
But I'm curious as to whether putting those expectations, I suppose it depends if you put the expectation on that. If you're trying to just hope that it might get better and it's a bit more of an understanding that it may or may not. Some days you say you might have a whole day where you don't, and then you might have the next day where you just every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But if there's the expectation that it every day is going to be better and better and better, that's likely where you're going to cause yourself more pain.
Yeah. It's because you're not only at that point fighting the thoughts that are occurring, but you're also fighting the expectation of yourself. And you're holding yourself to a standard that you just aren't equipped for.
Why do you think it's damaging to question your value of yourself or your expectation of yourself?
Because it's not reality. You're basing your pre-assumption off of a dream, not who you actually are. A bit like our previous podcast where we were talking about if you are trying to grow or target a certain business goal, your nervous system biologically might not be able to deal with that stress. It might not be able to deal with that pressure. It's the same, but from a personal development standpoint and self-improvement standpoint of you might not have the skills to overcome trauma with the speed and efficiency that you're placing the expectation on. So it's unreasonable for you to expect yourself to succeed when you're just not equipped for that level. It'd be like saying, oh, okay, I'm going to run, Usain Bolt ran 100 meters in under 10 seconds. I'm going to train for 2 months and I can see, oh yeah, well, week 1, I go from 20 seconds down to 15 seconds. That's great. If I just continue this, I'll be doing it in 5 seconds. No worries. And then you get there and you're like, oh, actually, no, like you can't do that. But my expectations were that, yeah, I should be able to do that. It's like, he's got long legs. I've got long legs. There you go.
Usain Bolt famously said something along the lines of, it took me 10 years to run 9 seconds. But yeah, I think when I asked you that question, for me, what I think of is kindness. You know, if I was to imagine someone I deeply care about as a friend going through a breakup and putting the expectation or pressure on them that you're going to feel better in a month, and then when it comes to the month and they don't, and then looking negatively at them or judging them, I'd be like, what's wrong with me? Why am I so mean? Why is there such a lack of love and empathy? So when I think about why should we not look with judgment towards ourselves, it's because it's self-compassion. You want to understand you're getting better. You want to feel better. But again, it's not linear. It's not going to follow a scheduled path. So this expectation that you should be feeling better shows a complete lack of self-love. And likely that person that is experiencing a breakup and has that lack of self-love is then going to look for external validation, which is likely then going to come in the form of a new relationship when they're not emotionally ready for it, and could fall into that serial data mentality because they need that constant validation from external sources rather than that self-love that comes from the grieving and the growth.
Absolutely.
Do you think it's a mistake to measure progress by the absence of struggle?
Do I think it's a mistake to measure progress by the absence of struggle?
Or the absence of pain, the absence of grief,